clear when I'm speaking my mind. Let me be clear when I'm stating my side. Let me be clear when I say that I mean all my words, so you know that I don't plan to lie. Let me be clear, I don't care if I get on get nerves, you will not push my words to the side. I'ma be clear when I tell you I've been on a mission, I got good intentions inside. Let me be clear, let me be clear, let me be clear, I don't need you to ride. Let me be clear, let me be clear, let me be clear, that you won't keep me quiet. Let me be clear, let me be clear.
Hey folks, welcome back to this week's episode of Let's Be Clear with Janika and Doc. Today we're going to continue with the second part of our two-part segment on Pregnancy and Infancy Loss Awareness Month.
Yes.
In part one, we talked about how you show up to yourself, i.e. what does that look like and mean to you once this happens.
Right.
Once this kind of loss hits you in your life, or you experience something like this. And today we're going to talk about how you show up to the rest of the world.
Right, which is a little bit more complicated because you're doing it at the same time, right? So that I think that's part of the challenge in navigating it.
So yeah, how you show up to the rest of the world, i.e. what that looks like in your partner relationship with your significant other, what that looks like showing up in your friendship relationships and in your family relationships, what that looks like in the work world, in your religious community, and just overall.
Right.
How do you continue to reconcile how you're feeling about yourself as it relates to how you proceed through relationships? Yeah. Does that change? Does that look different? So, you ready to get started?
Ready as I'll ever be.
So, you said something just now, Janika, that I think is crucial. And I hadn't quite considered until you said that. And you said that how you show up to the world can be complicated because you're still trying to figure out how you show up to yourself at the same time.
Yes.
Can you explain to us what you meant by that? Can you break that down for us?
So as you're grieving and trying to figure out how you're feeling about the loss and trying to, I guess, navigate your own emotions, you're still having to go to work and go to church or synagogue or whatever your religious affiliation is. Show up to family functions. People are checking on you. And then they're grieving too, right? So trying to navigate all of that while you're figuring out how you feel. It's all happening at the same time. And so there are some days where you do it better than others. And some days you're like, nope, I got nothing.
How do you show up to your loved ones who are also grieving with and for you? Because I have found in my own personal relationships over the years, over the last 20 years, and also recently, several of my loved ones, close friends, are going through these kinds of losses. And I don't necessarily want them to feel like they have to caretake my grief while they're trying to figure out their own grief and sort their way through their grief. But I find that sometimes it can get a little sticky at times. It has gotten sticky at times. And so, how do we begin to move through that?
I think that's the challenging part, is because with some people, family and friends and our partners, you feel like you need to caretake them because you feel guilty for it. So you feel responsible. You feel like I've done something to cause this, to cause their pain as well as my own. And so now I'm responsible for fixing it, which you're not. And I think that's part of that caretaking dilemma. But recognizing that grief is grief. And so we can grieve together, we can grieve separately, but I don't have to caretake your grief.
Did you feel like when you were going through these losses more immediately when they happened, did you feel like you had to caretake others' grief?
To a degree. To a degree. I felt like I had to, at first I had to like check on them. Or like when people would check on me, I would kind of try to like minimize it. Now, I didn't want my grief to be a burden to them.
Now, I have found that to be the case. I mean, folks, these are women that I adore, that I love.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I have found that, you know, when I've tried to check on them and just check in, sometimes it is a flatness, a bluntness, that I know they're struggling with, but I don't want to push.
Right.
And so it's almost like, you know, and I just let that be the space for what that is. But sometimes, you know, I'm going to be honest, I get a little frustrated because I know that you're hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you know, we're sisters. We've grieved together over the past 25, 30 years in other forms of death and loss. And so, you know, what does that look like in particular to let your loved ones grieve with you over this kind of loss? And I say that because I read an article recently with Tamron Hall. For those of you that aren't familiar with, Miss Tamron Hall used to be, what was she? Today
Show, I think.
Today Show. And now she has her own daytime talk show. And her and her husband recently gave birth to their little munchkin Moses via IVF. But Tamron Hall had a long struggle to get there as well, to this place of actually giving birth to her son. And in her article, she talked about when she would go through the different cycles, I believe, of her IVF, and kind of like loss when, you know, it was like a failed cycle or these other losses. The disappointment, and also feeling like she was letting other people down as well.
Right.
Her loved ones who were excited for her. And she said after a while, her and her husband just decided to keep that to themselves.
Yeah.
Because she didn't want to feel like she had to caretake their grief.
Right.
So how do you begin to just kind of let other people show up for you? And this particular kind of loss, because remember last week, in our last segment, you talked about how your pastor said, but wait a minute, you've grieved other losses. Why wouldn't you grieve this?
I think you have to be much clearer with what you need.
Okay.
And it's a lot harder because it's a much more personal type of loss. Because, and I've tried to explain to some friends of mine, especially since the last episode aired, you know, there's been a lot of support, a lot of people reaching out. I've had a lot of conversation with people who didn't know kind of all of what I felt and gone through, right? And in some conversations, people talking about, well, you know, I remember going through this particular loss. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of different though. It is different than losing a friend or a family member, and not to minimize these other losses, but that's just different. And so to let someone show up for you means I have to be much clearer with what I need or don't need or don't want, or when I need space. Because losing an aunt or an uncle or a cousin or whomever isn't like losing part of myself, generally speaking. You're losing the relationship, you're losing the person. It's someone you've known, but they are their own person. And when it's a miscarriage, this is someone I'm creating.
Is that the same for mothers whose babies are born stillborn, or who are born who die shortly after birth?
I would imagine so. I mean, I haven't been through that experience, so I don't want to make any assumptions. So if you have been through that, then please let us know your experience and your perspective. But I would imagine it's different because this is someone that is dependent on you, someone who you formed, you know that, like, with your daughter, you've known her longer than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So your connection with her is going to be different. As opposed to other friends or family members. So I think that, not to minimize any other loss, it's just different. I think when it's this kind of thing, there's a lot more in terms of identity that comes up that I don't know comes, at least for me, hasn't come up in other losses that I've had.
So in terms of how you show up to the rest of the world, does this kind of loss, do these kinds of losses shift or potentially challenge you to think about who you are differently and how you then will engage or interact with the rest of the world?
It makes me question, who am I? What do I want in life? Is this what I want in life? And in one of the conversations I've had since that last episode, and all the changes I've gone through since then, it's kind of been a rebirthing and a born again kind of experience. Not to use this birthing language too much, more in a religious kind of way. And in the conversation I had with the person, that's kind of how it was discussed, in more of a religious born again kind of experience. But that I have changed emotionally, physically, spiritually, in all these other ways. And unfortunately, my miscarriages were kind of a catalyst for that. So
then, as you're changing or as you're evolving and trying to figure out, so to speak, what is your new normal? What is your new...
You have to find a new normal.
Right, your new normal. How do you communicate that to others? Your partner, your family members, your close friends, your loved ones. What does that look like? How, what are some ways that, others can be mindful of? And again, these are just examples, guys. Feel free to chime in the discussions below to let us know what you think. But if you're, suggesting and telling us that who you are has shifted and how you show up to the world as a result has shifted, then what are some of the ways that others can be receptive to that and how they can potentially shift in response to that?
I think recognizing that these experiences are life-changing for people, and not dismissing it as, oh, you'll get over it, you'll have another one. I think has been by far the most dismissive thing I've ever heard. Or
that seems very invalidating.
It is.
And to minimize what you're going through in your loss.
I think
your losses.
That makes me very angry. I'm actually getting emotional just thinking about some of those comments. Or I mentioned last time, being in church and people praying for babies as if that erases the loss that I've already had. It doesn't. And so you praying for extra babies to rain down from heaven is not going to change the pain that I'm feeling. If anything, it's incredibly offensive to kind of try and push me out of my grieving process.
Do you think that sometimes, as we talk about how you show up to the world, I think sometimes folks say things based on what makes them comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
In the moment.
I think in general with grief, people do that.
Right.
And when it's something that they don't understand, like pregnancy and infant loss and stillbirth, I think they have no idea what that experience is like. They don't know the statistics. They don't know how common it is. They don't know what causes it. So rather than educate themselves, they want to make themselves more comfortable because it's an uncomfortable topic.
And I know for us as human beings, just in general, we don't like ambiguity. We don't like gray. We like things very this or that. And
category fits nicely in a little box.
Because typically, guys, that's how our brains function. That's how we tend to make sense of the world because there's so many different things going on at once. We like to be able to just kind of sort things through quickly. That's how we survive. But with these kinds of losses, pregnancy and infant loss,
it's all gray.
It's all gray. we don't know why these things happen. And so how has these experiences shifted or helped you to be clear in terms of, or to rethink what you want in terms of being a parent, being a mother? Because for many women, I can't even imagine after these kinds of losses, right? How you begin to see yourself, and then potentially what that means for you when you think about having other children or being a parent in general. What does that look like in terms of how you show up to the outside world, the rest of the world, in that way?
I think in terms of showing up, I've had to put up a lot of boundaries to even figure out some of this identity stuff, right? So to kind of shield myself so I could figure this out, a lot of prayer and meditation has gone into figuring this stuff out and having these conversations with myself and with God about parenthood and what this might look like and who am I? Is this in the cards for me, so to speak? Is this even destined for me? What am I open to? And so being open to kind of whatever comes. So it might be adoption, it might be fostering, it might be...
for some women, it's IVF.
For some women, it's IVF. That's not an option I wanted to do. Just personally, it just was not for me. And, I'm open to being a step parent. I know some women are not. Some women are not interested in going down that road. Everyone's road to motherhood and to parenthood is different. And that's okay. Some people go the route of surrogacy. Some people, it's different for everyone.
But I think within that, though, I think my hope, my desire, my prayer is for, not just for you, Janika, but for many other women in general, just to allow yourself to be open, to consider all of the different possibilities.
I think...
and figure out what works for you within that. Because I think sometimes when you experience these kinds of losses, I think there can be a tendency to become somewhat even more rigid and more closed and more shut down.
Yes. I mean, I was, after the first one, like I said with the second one, I was like, no, I'm going to do this. I'm a woman, this is supposed to happen. Because that's kind of how I was, I think most of us are taught to believe. And so I was charting, I was taking my temperature, I was trying very specific things, eating certain foods, like you try it all. I know even when you're doing IVF, there are certain things that they say help with egg quality, right? And so you try things that maybe you weren't interested in trying. Maybe you're doing acupuncture and you're like, I hate needles, but we're going to try acupuncture because you want to go this route so badly. And so I think for me, the biggest question as you figure out what path you're going to take to motherhood is what matters most, right? Is the thing that's most important birthing? Is that what is so important to you? Do you want to carry it so badly? If so, why? What does that mean to you? Is what's most important that the child is biologically and genetically yours? So is surrogacy an option? So I think figuring out what is most important. If those things aren't important, are you open to adoption? Are you open to fostering? Does it have to be a baby? Are you open to meeting someone who already has kids? You know, what's an option and what's not? Some of those things really makes a difference because otherwise you start doing things and you don't know why and it drives you crazy.
And then even more when it doesn't work out the way you would like it to. What does that mean to show up to the rest of the world in relationship to or in the presence of being around other babies and children? As it relates to,
it's hard.
Baby showers, birthday parties, christenings, things like that. Because I know that can be challenging.
That's an understatement. One of my best friends is pregnant now, and I went to the gender reveal, and I was already tired, and I get there and I'm feeling something. I don't know what it is, and I'm trying to be present. It is a struggle, y'all, and this is someone I've known for 12 years, and she's one of those pregnant people that's like glowing, like the jolly pregnant girl, right? Like, so you're like super happy for her because she's like the jolly one with the belly, like
minimal nausea, minimal discomfort, all of that.
She's uncomfortable, but like,
because I wasn't a jolly pregnant woman. Let me just tell you that.
I know for a fact
jolly.
that I wouldn't be.
Yeah,
because I'm not a jolly person in general.
She can be a little cantankerous, just a little ornery, y'all, just a little bit. I'm just saying.
Anyway, we both know I wouldn't be jolly, right? So I get there and I'm like, and I'm feeling it. And I know myself and I'm like, I've already accepted all of this. I know I've accepted that I don't want to go down this path of having a baby and all of this.
You mean birthing a baby?
Birthing a baby. Okay. When I say having a baby, I mean birthing.
Okay.
And so as we're doing the gender reveal stuff, I'm getting teary. And I'm like, what is this? And I realized for me it was grief. And so I was grieving the fact that I never got to do it. And recently we had the actual baby shower. And so like, my mom bought the gifts and everything because I hate shopping. And I went and got the card. And so I've nicknamed the baby and everything. Like that's my heart. I already love this little girl. And I'm reading the cards. So I'm in CVS like holding it in. Because I'm like, this is getting to me. And it's just hard. And it's not because, in my case, I can't speak for everybody. And it's not because I necessarily want to go down this road again. Because for me, after having two, I can't take a third. I cannot handle third miscarriage. I'm going to be in someone's psych hospital rocking in a corner if I have a third miscarriage. I know that about myself. And so for me, it's been very intentional and very purposeful to not try to have another baby or another pregnancy. But it doesn't mean I don't grieve. It doesn't mean those moments aren't hard. Because all of these are milestones, and all of these, especially in today's culture and society, everything is a party. Everything is memorialized. You got the pictures. You got the...
Everything is memorialized.
No, granted, I don't think I would do the pregnancy pictures with the belly. Like, I'm a very private person and like to be covered up in case y'all can't tell. Like, frankly, if I did a pregnancy shoot, it would be like in like using a hoodie with like a little belly.
And she's being very honest with you guys. Me and her mother would really strangle her. We would have to do a show with her to get her to fill it up.
No.
But I think what you're saying, what just occurred to me, it just came to me. This is grief.
It's grief.
And I think sometimes
we miss it.
We go out of our way to avoid feeling the grief. And I'm not saying, folks, we want to fan the flame to our grief. But what I am saying is that sometimes, when Aretha Franklin died, Tyler Perry spoke at Miss Franklin's funeral. And he, shared with her children that he wishes them just to encourage them that the grief will come in waves. No matter how long it'll take, it'll come in. Sometimes, no matter how long the person has been passed or gone on, it'll just come in waves sometimes. as he recalled how he still grieves his mom. And I can bear witness to that through my own grief. And I think what you're talking about is just sometimes how that grief just comes in waves. And there's nothing you can do to avoid it. Mm-mm. To me, that lets you know that you're human. Mm-hmm. That you were connected, mm-hmm. that you felt, that there was an attachment.
I think if you can't there's a difference between healthy grief and it coming in waves versus I can't get over it. I can't get out of bed. I can't move
What does that look like
stuck.
When you're stuck in your grief? And how does that show up to the world?
Stuck in grief is obsession.
Obsession in what way?
I think, and this is, ladies, please forgive me, given this topic, I think obsession is, I'm going to have a baby. I'm going to have a baby. When I have my baby, is that going to happen? Like sometimes we have to be realistic. And we're obsessing over the grief, but never dealing with it, but just ready to move on. Never healing, but then you always talk about it. That's not healthy. If you always talk about something, like 24/7, that's not healthy. It's just not.
How does that show up in relationships? How does that impact potentially if you're obsessing over this how does this impact the interaction with your significant other, with your friends, with everyone else?
You're not present. You're never present. Because all you're thinking about, all you're talking about, all you are focused on is, in this case, the baby, or the loss. I've had this loss. Like I said, I was so focused on having a baby that for the second one, that's all I focused on. I was so focused on making my body do this thing it was supposed to do. It was obsessive. That's all I cared about.
So how do you come to terms within yourself, and what does that look like if or when a moment of truth and you come to the realization and you begin to accept that this may just be something that my body is not capable of?
It's hard.
And what does that look like moving forward?
For me, accepting, it's hard, but it was freeing. Because I didn't have to do all those things. I didn't have to obsess. I didn't have to wonder what's wrong with me. I didn't feel depressed every time I got my period. That was the worst feeling. Every month, you're kind of just waiting, and you're like, is it coming? Is it coming? Is it coming? Am I pregnant? And then the minute it comes, you're like, waterworks, because you're so waiting with bated breath about if I'm pregnant or not. And then it's just like, I'm not pregnant. And then you're depressed, and you're sick and uncomfortable because of PMS. And then you're doing all these things to your body. And so while it was hard to accept, maybe it's not in the cards, it was freeing. I feel like I could just live my life. I could create this normal. Because again, I didn't know what I was doing or not doing, so I could go back to lifting. I could go back to running, or eating what I wanted to eat. I didn't have to be anxious all the time. You know, I didn't have to be stuck in a relationship I didn't really want.
So in terms of freeing, this allows you potentially to be more authentic.
Oh yeah.
In your relationships and your interactions.
It changed
with others.
That point for me was pivotal, because it changed my whole outlook on life. It changed my perspective on my relationships, with my spouse, with my friends, with my family. It allowed me to be clear, and say, and the more I accept it, the more I can be firm on certain things. Like, for example, I don't like Mother's Day. That's one day I don't go to church. I mean, I go to church a lot of days.
But she ain't no CME Christian, y'all.
But
Christmas, Mother's Day, and Easter.
That is one day I certainly don't go. Because everyone, Are you a mother? And it is the most complicated question to answer. Because to most people, no. To women who've had miscarriages, yes.
And other forms of infant loss. I would say yes.
So it's a very complicated thing. And even to the point where when I'm out, I don't even tell people Happy Mother's Day. Because the first thing they say, oh, are you a mother? I'm like, just because you don't see me with a baby in hand and a stroller don't mean...
Right.
First of all, it doesn't mean that I don't have children. But that's a big assumption. It's a big question.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So I just don't say anything come Mother's Day. I don't like the day. I don't do anything. I stay home. And the people that know how I feel, they might get me a card or, people say it to me. And that feels good. But for the most part, in terms of showing up to the world, I don't on certain days. I just don't. And that's okay.
I agree with you on that. Anything you want to say in wrapping up as we bring to a conclusion our 2-part segment?
If you have a hard time showing up for yourself and for the world in your relationships, then I definitely want to encourage you to talk to your friends and family. If you would like, seek a therapist. But take the time you need to grieve, because this is very challenging. Yesterday was the actual day of observance for pregnancy and infant loss. And if you chose to light a candle and observe, then know that my heart is with you. If you did not, know my heart is with you. How you choose to process this is up to you. And I just thank you for letting me share with you and be with you. And I don't take it lightly. I appreciate it.
Thank you, folks, for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. I dedicate our segment to grandmothers who didn't have an opportunity or lived in a time where these kinds of conversations were not possible and they had to bury their infants in silence.
Yes.
Janika, thank you for letting me be a part of this process.
Thank you.
My love to all of my friends who are going through these various forms of grief. I love you. I hope that I have made you proud, and I hope that I have been appropriately respectful and mindful in being a part of this conversation. And to the rest of you guys, our viewing audience, I hope that maybe, even if it's just one thing, you find a bit of encouragement and hope and peace from our segment. Be kind to others, but most importantly, be kind to yourselves. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Let me be clear when I'm speaking my mind. Let me be clear when I'm stating my side. Let me be clear when I say that I mean all my words, so you know that I don't plan to lie. Let me be clear, I don't care if I get on get nerves, you will not push my words to the side. I'ma be clear when I tell you I've been on a mission, I got good intentions inside. Let me be clear, let me be clear, let me be clear. I don't need you to ride. Let me be clear, let me be clear, let me be clear that you won't keep me quiet. Let me be clear, let me be clear, let me be clear. I don't care about the climate. Let me be clear, let me be clear, let me be clear that you all are invited. Let me be clear that I see all the violence getting so bad that it's breaking my silence. We got some leaders that's always been steering us wrong. To be honest, we need a new pilot. You need some help, I ain't talking about sirens. Hope I can bring to your life some new guidance. Lately our world has been constantly going astray. To be real, everybody been wildin'. Once I was asleep, maybe I was just drunk. How did we end up with President Trump? Was he really voted or we out of luck? Did he pay the Russians to give him a bump? Somebody just tell me I really been stuck. I've been banging my head to the point I got lumps. If you justify that, then you cracking me up. If you don't like my work, then I don't give a cluck. Amazon getting wild, I ain't talking about prime. The Brazilian